Welcome, traveler. Tonight our tale is not of distant myths, but of fire and blood made real. We step into the age of conquest, when 3 dragons carved a realm from 7 warring kingdoms, and a single throne of iron was forged in flame. From Aegon the Conqueror to the fall of the Mad King, this is the story of crowns won, crowns broken, and the heavy price of power. Sit back, let the night surround you, and let history itself unfold, where every oath, every betrayal, and every drop of blood leads us closer to the fate of kings. If you enjoy this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can follow us deeper into the cosmos. Long before the memory of maesters and singers, in the eastern continent of Essos, there lay a land of stone and salt winds, where mountains rose like jagged teeth above a restless sea. This land was called Andalos, and it was the cradle of a people whose destiny would shape the fate of Westeros itself. The Andals were tall and fair, with hair the color of pale wheat or burnished gold, their skin sun-touched, their arms accustomed to iron. They lived in tribes that warred against one another for pasture land and honor, their lives measured in feuds and raids. Yet amidst this violence, there stirred something more enduring than bloodshed, a faith, and with it, the seeds of unity. The tale is still sung. A shepherd, tending his flocks upon a lonely hill, dreamt one night of 7 shining figures, who stood around him in a circle of light. Each spoke with a different voice, yet all were bound as one. The father promised justice, the mother mercy, the maiden innocence, the warrior strength, the smith craft, the crone wisdom, and the stranger mystery and death. When the shepherd woke, the grass was scorched in a perfect ring, and his flocks lay prostrate in silence. From that day, he preached the will of the 7, and the tribes gathered to hear. In the years that followed, the Andals raised temples of stone, carving the faces of the 7 upon their doorways. Their chiefs swore oaths before the 7-pointed star. They learned to temper iron in the mountain fires, crafting blades stronger than the bronze and copper of their neighbors. A sense of destiny grew among them, that they were chosen, not merely to rule their valleys, but to claim the world beyond. Yet Andalos was not kind. The land was hard, its soil thin, its hills rocky. As the people multiplied, hunger followed. Chiefs quarreled, clans clashed, and the blood of kin mingled with the salt of the sea. To the west lay a horizon of endless blue, whispered of in legend. Some spoke of fertile lands beyond, rich with forests and rivers, where other men dwelled. To many, the sea was a barrier. To the Andalos, guided by visions of the 7, it became a path. At first the voyages were small, a few fishing craft lashed together, bearing warriors with spear and shield. But soon whole fleets were built, rough-hewn but sturdy, with square sails woven from hemp and hides. Families boarded with all they owned, goats and cattle, bronze idols of the 7, and bundles of seed to plant in foreign soil. The crossing was perilous. Storms raged, ships splintered against hidden reefs. Some were lost forever, swallowed by the deeps. Others made landfall on strange, barren isles, never to reach Westeros. Yet enough survived that. One by one, Andal feet touched the shores of a new world. The first landings were in the Vale of Arryn, where cliffs rose sheer from the narrow sea, crowned by green mountains. Here the Andals clashed with the first men who had ruled Westeros for thousands of years. The first men were darker, broader, their speech older, their weapons of bronze and stone. They prayed to the old gods of the forest, nameless spirits bound to the heart trees, whose white bark bled red sap like tears. To the first men, the Andals seemed demons, pale giants clad in mail, wielding iron blades that sliced through bronze like butter. To the Andals, The first men were heathens, bound to silent gods who gave no voice. It was not enough for them to conquer land, they sought to conquer the very souls of those who lived there. The wars were long and bitter. Andal axes felled ancient forests, burning the groves sacred to the old gods. Villages of the first men were put to the torch, their warriors cut down by the sharpest steel of their foes. Yet the first men did not yield easily. They fought with a ferocity born of millennia upon the land, with knowledge of every river and hill. Ballads still recall the Battle of 7 Stars, when 7 Andal chieftains swore oaths beneath the sky, carving the 7-pointed star upon their flesh. They marched united against the Lords of the Vale, whose banners of first men had gathered to cast them back into the sea. The clash was terrible. The sky darkened with arrows, the ground ran red. But in the end, Andal's steel triumphed. The chiefs raised the Star of the Seven over the mountains of the Vale, and the first men were broken. From there the Andals spread like fire. Into the riverlands they came, cutting through the marshes and forests, into the Westerlands, where they met the proud houses of Lann the Clever's line, into the Stormlands, where gales and thunder could not halt their sails. Each conquest brought slaughter, yet also mingling. Some lords of the first men bent the knee, swearing fealty and taking Andal daughters as wives. Others were destroyed utterly, their names lost save in the stones of ruined forts. Through it all, the faith of the Seven spread as inexorably as Andal's swords. Septons preached beneath the boughs of weirwoods, declaring the old gods false. Idol by idol, sept by sept, the south of Westeros turned from the silent forests to the voices of the Seven. Only in the north did the first men hold fast, under the dire walls of Winterfell, where the old ways endured. By the time centuries had passed, the Andal Invasion was no longer an invasion, but a transformation. Great houses of Andal blood ruled the Vale, the Reach, the Westerlands, the Stormlands, and the Riverlands. In the Vale, the Arryns built their seat high upon the mountain, declaring themselves kings of the mountain and Vale. In the Reach, the Gardener kings embraced Andal knights and their faith. The Lannisters of Casterly Rock grew rich, marrying Andal steel to first men cunning. The culture of Westeros was remade. Iron replaced bronze. The common tongue, derived from Andal speech, spread across the land. The faith of the Seven became the guiding star of law and custom, shaping oaths, marriages, and coronations. The faith militant, sworn swords of religion, rose to enforce the will of the Seven upon lords and kings alike. Yet the memory of blood never vanished. The first men who survived in the south carried Andal blood now, but in the north they spoke of the invaders as wolves speak of fire. There, the Starks and their bannermen kept to the old gods, to the silent weirwoods that had watched since the Dawn Age. Thus Westeros became a realm divided not only by kings and rivers, but by gods themselves. The Seven in the south, the old gods in the north. A scar cut deep, and though time dulled it, it never healed. The coming of the Andals was not merely a war of swords, but of faith against faith. Nowhere was this seen more starkly than in the groves of the weirwoods. To the first men, those trees were sacred, their pale white bark like bone, their leaves red as blood, their faces carved by ancestors long dead. Within the silence of the forests, the old gods whispered, unseen and unnamed. To the Andals, however, these groves were abominations. The Seven had spoken with clarity, in words and visions, while the old gods spoke only through wind and silence. Septons who crossed with the invaders called the weirwoods idols of false spirits, demanding their destruction. So began the axe-felling of the sacred groves, a campaign as relentless as any battle. Entire forests were cut down, their stumps left to rot where once hearts of gods had beat. There are tales of first men warriors binding themselves to weirwoods, refusing to leave as the axes fell. They perished screaming, their blood soaking the roots. Some say the faces carved upon those trunks wept crimson sap for centuries afterward, silent witnesses to the passing of their worshippers. This was the true victory of the Andals, not the killing of bodies, but the killing of gods. For every weirwood cut, a sept was raised. For every silent grove burned, a seven-pointed star was etched upon a lord's hall. And thus the south of Westeros bent, not only in flesh, but in spirit. The Andals did not merely conquer, they built kingdoms upon conquest. In the Vale, the Arryns rose as kings, their bloodline tracing back to the seven chiefs of legend. They raised the Eyrie high upon the mountain peaks, as though reaching for the very heavens their faith had promised. In the Reach, the proud Gardener kings bent not from defeat, but from calculation. They saw in the Andals not merely foes, but allies, who brought with them a code of chivalry, of oaths sworn before gods who bore witness. Andal knights rode alongside Reachman cavalry, and together they built a realm of fertile fields and shining tourneys. In the Westerlands, the tale was bloodier. The Lannisters of Casterly Rock, cunning descendants of Lann the Clever, fought bitter wars with Andal warlords before seizing advantage. Gold, the Rock's eternal gift, became their weapon. By wedding Andal heiresses and buying Andal swords, they turned invaders into allies, and allies into bannermen. Thus the Rock remained unbroken, but its lords wore Andal steel upon their hips. The Stormlands were another matter. There, the Durrandon kings, later remembered as the Storm Kings, met Andal steel with storms of their own. Legends speak of battles fought upon cliffs, where waves shattered men as surely as swords. Though many Andals died upon those shores, enough remained to settle, wed, and spread their faith inland. The Storm Kings remained proud and defiant, but even their courts came to house septons and knights. The Riverlands suffered most of all, lying at the heart of Westeros, with no mountains to shield them and rivers that guided invaders inland. The Riverlords fell piecemeal. One by one, ancient houses of the first men were extinguished, their halls given over to Andal conquerors. In the centuries to follow, the Riverlands would know no lasting king, for too many Andal houses claimed sovereignty, each devouring the other in endless wars. Yet not all bowed. In the north, the Andals found no easy prey. The land itself was a wall, vast, cold, and wild. The armies of the Andals, used to gentler winters and fertile plains, could not endure the frozen winds, nor the endless forests. Worse still, the first men of the north were unlike their southern kin. They had not been softened by centuries of Andal mingling. Their blood was iron, their faith unshaken. The Starks of Winterfell led this defiance. With direwolves upon their banners and the old gods at their backs, they crushed every Andal host that dared cross the neck. Battles were fought upon frozen lakes, where whole armies vanished beneath the ice, in bogs where Andal knights sank to their doom beneath the mists of the Crannogmen. Again and again the invaders tried, and again they failed. Thus the north remained inviolate. When the Andal wave receded, it left behind only scattered corpses and broken swords. And with that, the north earned its title, the last bastion of the first men, where the old gods still held dominion. One of the great legacies of the Andal Invasion was the birth of the Night. In Andalos, warriors had sworn oaths to chiefs and gods, but in Westeros, this oath was sharpened into ritual. A man who would be knighted swore vows before the Seven, pledging to defend the innocent, to protect the faith, and to fight with honor. In exchange, he was girded with sword and spurs, and given a place of respect above common soldiers. Knighthood became not only a military role, but a cultural bond. and her lords raised sons to aspire to the title, and daughters to wed knights. The image of the shining warrior in armor became a living emblem of Andal triumph, a symbol that would endure for millennia. Yet knighthood also sowed division, for in the north, where the faith held no sway, the very word was hollow. There, a warrior's honor was measured not by vows before septons, but by the truth of his word and the strength of his arm. This divide would echo through history, creating a gulf of identity between north and south. As Andal power spread, so too did the reach of the faith. Septons and scepters traveled with armies, not only to bless warriors, but to root the faith in conquered lands. Great septs were raised, some of marble and crystal, glowing in sunlight like gems upon the earth. The faith declared itself not merely a religion, but a power equal to kings. Its voice guided laws, its doctrines shaped marriages and inheritance, and its blessings legitimized rulers. In time, the faith militant rose, two orders of sworn warriors, the warriors' sons and the poor fellows, who bore sword and star in the name of the Seven. To defy them was to defy not only men, but gods themselves. In this, the Andals created something new in Westeros, not only realms of men, but realms bound by a unified spiritual authority. For the first time, the south of Westeros possessed a common religion, a common tongue, and a common code. It was the beginning of a shared identity, though fractured, though contested, that would pave the way for kingdoms to one day be bound together. By the time Andal's swords ceased clashing, Westeros had been remade. The first men and the Andals were no longer separate peoples, but entwined. Lords of pure Andal blood grew rare. Marriages wove lineages together until most noble houses carried both ancestries. Even the faith, triumphant though it was, adapted. Septs rose beside heart trees, and septons learned to temper their zeal when among stubborn northerners. But the old wounds lingered, the cutting down of the weirwoods, the burning of villages, the blood spilled upon the fields of the Vale and the riverlands. These left scars that memory could not erase. To this day, maesters say, when the wind rustles through certain groves, one can almost hear the whispers of the old gods, mourning the loss of their faithful. The Andal Invasion had not ended the age of first men, nor had it erased the old gods, but it had transformed Westeros forever, setting the stage for every war, every throne, every betrayal that would follow. The Andals had not come as one nation, but as many clans, bound only by faith and steel. Yet once they conquered, they found themselves lords of strange lands, ruling peoples whose tongues and customs differed from their own. To hold what they had seized, they bound their power with oaths. Everywhere Andal kings rose, oaths were sworn upon the seven-pointed star, carved in stone or bound in parchment. A river lord might swear fealty to an Andal king, who in turn bent knee to the Seven. Even marriages became oaths made holy. No union was deemed valid without a septon's blessing, a prayer to father and mother. Thus the faith entwined itself in every bond of fealty, until to break one's word was to sin before gods as well as men. The first men, in time, learned these ways. They swore oaths in the Andal manner, sometimes while still keeping their silent prayers to the weirwoods. In this way, the two cultures began to merge, not evenly, not peacefully, but inevitably. Andal fathers gave their sons first men names, while first men lords raised septs beside their godswoods. It was in this weaving of oaths and blood that the great houses of the south took root, shaping the map of Westeros for centuries to come. As the kingdoms settled, the faith of the Seven grew ever stronger. The septons who had crossed with invaders were no longer wandering preachers but counselors to kings, keepers of law, and arbiters of justice. From their influence rose two militant orders, sworn to defend the faith with sword and star. The warriors' sons, knights of noble birth who took vows eternal. They bore bright armor, 7-pointed stars upon their cloaks, and wielded swords anointed in holy oil. The poor fellows, humbler yet fiercer, made up of small folk, who gave up family and land to live as soldiers of the Seven. They roamed barefoot, clad in rags, but carried cudgels and axes with zeal. Together, they became the faith militant, a power unto themselves, often greater than kings. When a lord defied septons, the poor fellows descended like a tide, and when kings sought glory, they sought the blessing of the warriors' sons. Through this order, the faith wielded its authority not only in septs, but on battlefields, and in truth, some say, the faith never forgave the North for rejecting them. In whispered sermons, septons claimed the day would come when even the weirwoods would burn, and the North would kneel to the Seven at last. From the invasion sprang countless legends, told in halls and hearths for generations. Sir Artis Arryn, called the Winged Knight, was said to have been carried aloft by a giant falcon in the Battle of Seven Stars, striking down foes from above. Whether man or myth, his name crowned the kings of the Vale thereafter. Lady Nymeria, not to be confused with the later Rhoynar princess, was a warrior maiden who led Andal hosts into the Riverlands, clad in mail, wielding a blade said to shine like fire. Songs claim her cries could rally armies and break foes alike. Sir Gawain Corbray, though he lived later, was said to have been descended from those first Andals, a knight whose valor in tournaments set the ideal for all who followed. Each tale bore the same refrain: Andal steel, Andal faith, Andal destiny, and in telling them, lords and small folk alike came to believe that the Andals had been chosen not only to conquer, but to rule forever. Yet no conquest lasts untouched. Even as the Andals imposed their faith, they found themselves changed by Westeros. The blood of the first men flowed into Andal veins through marriages of necessity and alliance. Stark and Dane, Blackwood and Manderley, though proud of their ancient stock, found themselves linked by daughters and sons to Andal houses. This mingling gave rise to lineages, both mighty and peculiar. Andal features, fair hair, tall stature, blended with the rugged build and darker hues of the first men. Out of this fusion came the look of most Westerosi noble houses that endure to this day. But it was not merely blood that blended. Hole's customs too became entwined. Andal chivalry met first men honor, creating codes of conduct that varied from vale to vale. Andal feasts of 7 courses merged with northern hunts and harvest rituals. Even language shifted, Andal speech giving birth to the common tongue, which slowly replaced older dialects until it was spoken from dawn to the wall. Westeros was becoming a patchwork quilt, sewn with Andal thread and first men cloth, yet bound together by something greater than either alone. For all this blending, the North remained apart. There the Starks and their bannermen clung fiercely to their gods, their speech, their ways. They remembered the axemen who felled their sacred groves, the fires that devoured their villages. Every story told in a northern hall carried a warning: the South is Andal, and the South forgets, but we remember. This memory gave the North its unity, while the Riverlands tore themselves apart with rival claimants, while the Vale squabbled among cousins, while the Stormlands roared and the Reach grew fat, the North endured. Its lords bent knee to Winterfell, its warriors fought as one, and its gods looked on in silence. Thus did the Andals forge Westeros, not into a single realm, but into 2 souls, South and North, faith and old gods, knight and warrior, Sept and Godswood, a fracture that would shape every war yet to come. Centuries after the Andal Invasion had remade Westeros, another power stirred across the sea. In the east, far from Andalos, lay the smoking hills and burning mountains of Valyria. There men had bent fire to their will, raising dragons from the earth itself. Their empire spread like flame across Essos, devouring Giscari, Rhoynar, and countless others. It is tempting to see the Andal Invasion as a story complete in itself, yet in truth, it was only the first reshaping of Westeros, softening the continent for a greater hammer blow to come. The faith, the common tongue, the practice of swearing oaths, all these would one day make it possible for a single dynasty to bind 7 kingdoms into one. Without the Andals, there could be no Targaryens. Without the felling of the Weirwoods, no throne of iron could have been forged. Thus, though the Andals knew it not, their invasion was but prelude to a far greater storm, a storm born in Valyria, carried by dragonfire, and destined to crown a conqueror. Even now, when Maesters write their chronicles, they mark the passage of ages, the dawn age of the first men, the age of heroes, the coming of the Andals. It was no mere invasion, but the turning of an epoch. They gave Westeros its language. They gave it its faith. They gave it knights, oaths, and spurs of iron. They carved kingdoms where once only tribes had dwelled. And in their wake, they left scars that never healed, the sundered bond between south and north, the silence of gods whose groves had burned, the suspicion that still lingered whenever a man swore an oath with too easy a smile. The Andals came as conquerors, but in the end they became Westerosi. And yet, some whisper, the land itself remembers. The old gods may be silent, but silence is not the same as death. Beneath the roots of weirwoods long forgotten, in the shadows of forests spared the axe, the first men's prayers still echo. One day, perhaps, they will be heard again. So ended the saga of the Andals, or rather, so began it. For their coming was not a conclusion, but a seed, planted deep in the soil of Westeros. From it grew the kingdoms that would clash, the faiths that would contend, the identities that would endure. The tale of Westeros cannot be told without them, yet it cannot be told by them alone. For even as they settled, even as septs rose and knights swore vows, across the sea the fires of Valyria burned higher, and from those flames, dragons would one day take wing, bearing with them a conquest unlike any Andal sword had ever wrought. The Seven had chosen the Andals to bring their light to Westeros, but another power, older, darker, and far more terrible, was stirring in the east, and its shadow would soon fall upon the land the Andals had remade. Long before the Doom, long before the Targaryens fled to Dragonstone, Valyria was no more than a land of fire and smoke. The peninsula jutted into the summer sea, a jagged claw of stone, pierced by mountains that never slept. From their peaks poured smoke, ash, and molten rock. Rivers of fire ran beneath the earth, feeding forges that glowed red by night and day. To most men of Essos, it was a wasteland. The Giscari of Old Gis, masters of a proud empire to the west, called it cursed. Yet there lived a humble folk, the Valyrians, shepherds who pastured their flocks on the green slopes between volcanoes. They worshipped strange gods of fire and shadow, and spoke of whispers rising from the earth. It was there the first dragon was tamed. Some say shepherds found dragon eggs in smoking caverns. Others claim the beasts had always been part of the land, children of the mountains themselves. Whatever the truth, it was the Valyrians who bent them to human will. How? The question remains unanswered. Maesters suspect sorcery woven with blood sacrifice. The Valyrians themselves declared it destiny. We are kin to flame, and flame obeys its own blood. Dragons gave them dominion, but it was blood that gave them mastery. Not every Valyrian could ride a dragon, only those of certain families, whose blood was said to burn hotter than the rest. These became the Dragon Lords, the rulers of their people. To preserve that gift, they turned inward, brother wedded sister, cousin wedded cousin. Outsiders called it abomination, but the Valyrians called it purity. The blood of the dragon must remain unbroken, they said. To them, incest was not sin but strength. This custom bred lineages, at once powerful and perilous. A few lines flourished, producing mighty riders. Others withered, yielding stillborn children, madness or deformity. Yet none questioned the law of blood. Better to risk ruin than to see dragons slip from their grasp. By the time Valyria rose against the Giscari, dozens of Dragonlord families ruled the freehold. Among them 3 names would echo down the centuries. House Velaryon, masters of the sea, who built fleets that carried Valyrian power far across Essos. Their patriarch, Corlys Velaryon I, was said to laugh louder than the waves, his beard shining like salt. Proud, boastful, but shrewd in trade, he made his house wealthy beyond reckoning. House Celtigar, whose red crabs scuttled upon their banners. The Celtigars were secretive, fond of blood rites and charms, their lords pale and sharp-faced. Lord Rogar Celtigar was infamous for demanding thralls be sacrificed at his feasts, claiming their blood sweetened the wine. Few dared oppose him. His dragon, Scylla, was said to be as cruel as her master. House Targaryen, a middling house among the 40, neither richest nor poorest, their line traced back to shepherd roots. Lord Aenar Targaryen was known as quiet and contemplative, more given to study than war. His peers mocked him as weak, but within his house stirred a daughter who dreamed in fire. These houses, along with scores of others, Valcaris, Lothlorien, Morgul, and more, sat in the Council of 40, the ruling body of the freehold. The council chamber of Valyria was a place of wonders and terrors. Its floor was obsidian, polished to a mirror, its roof open to the sky, so dragons could circle above while their masters debated. Here lords gathered not as subjects to a king, but as equals, or near equals. Each sought to outdo the rest, boasting of dragon size, steel forged, fleets launched. Alliances were made and broken in a single breath. Corlys Velaryon, booming with laughter, once declared that the sea obeys me as dragons obey you, landlocked fools. Rogar Celtigar sneered that ships burned like kindling before dragonfire, and Lord Aenar, seated apart, spoke seldom at all. The council was not unity but balance, 1,000 rivalries contained within a fragile frame. That frame held for centuries for who dared challenge dragon lords united, however quarrelsome. From their peninsula, the Valyrians surged outward. Against the Giscari Empire, they fought 5 wars, each bloodier than the last. Giscari legions marched with spears and elephants, their walls built of black stone harder than iron, but dragons flew above walls. Fire devoured spears. Elephants fled screaming before winged shadows. At last old Giz itself fell, its walls melted, its temples razed. The Valyrians sowed the earth with salt and sulfur, so nothing would grow there again. Thus perished a civilization 5,000 years old. From that day, Valyria was supreme. Valyria, the city, was unlike any other. Towers spiraled, as if grown from living stone. Bridges of twisted rock arched over rivers of fire. Aqueducts carried steaming water, and forges glowed red in every district. The dragon pit of Valyria was vast enough to hold 100 beasts, its roof open to the smoking sky. When the great families took flight together, the sun vanished behind their wings. Outsiders gaped in awe. Traders who came to Valyria returned with tales of wonders, but seldom with secrets, for the dragon lords kept their knowledge jealously. Foreigners were forbidden to walk the deepest forges, the darkest temples, or the highest towers. Each house had its character, stamped upon it by centuries of blood and pride. The Valyrians reveled in trade and spectacle. They hosted feasts by the sea, their tables groaning with fish and wine. Corlys Velaryon liked to declare that the winds themselves were his bannermen, carrying his sails wherever he wished. Yet behind his jests was hunger. He longed for a place among the foremost houses of the 40, and knew only conquest or marriage could grant it. The Celtigars cloaked themselves in ritual. Their halls were hung with red banners, their floors inlaid with crab shells, polished like gems. Lord Rogar's voice was thin but sharp, cutting through debate like a knife. He scorned laughter, declaring joy the province of weak men. To him, strength lay in fear, and he wielded it well. The Targaryens seemed lesser by comparison. Lord Aegon spoke with courtesy, but his words carried little weight. His dragon, Balerion's forebear, was smaller than others of the council. Yet his daughter Daenys watched keenly, her silver hair falling across violet eyes that seemed to see beyond the chamber. When lords bickered, she listened. When others mocked, she dreamed. It was Daenys Targaryen who dreamed of fire. In her visions, mountains split, towers fell, dragons shrieked as fire consumed them. She spoke to her father, trembling yet certain. The freehold will burn. Valyria will be no more. Only ashes will remain. Lord Aegon listened. He was mocked often for his quiet ways, but he loved his daughter and trusted her sight. He brought her words to the council. There, laughter rang. Corlys Velaryon clapped his hands and declared it the fancy of a girl. Rogar Celtigar sneered that if doom came, it would devour the weak first, and House Targaryen would be its first meal. Other lords muttered that the gods of fire blessed Valyria eternally. Yet Aegon was not swayed. He withdrew further from court, listening more to Daenys than to his peers. Some called him coward, others whispered he was wise. While the Targaryens fretted, the great houses grew only more arrogant. The Valyrians launched fleets eastward, bringing back gold and slaves. They spoke of conquering far islands and seas beyond imagining. The Celtigars deepened their rights, sacrificing ever more thralls to ensure the favor of their gods. Other houses quarreled over borders, over dragons, over bloodlines. One dragon lord, Morgul of House Valcaris, proposed uniting all families under a single crown. He claimed only one man should wield ultimate dominion, lest rivals weaken them. His peers rejected him with fury. "We are not slaves to a king," thundered Corlys Velaryon. "We are lords of fire, all of us." The council broke in anger. Morgul left in rage, swearing his dragon would prove him right. Weeks later, he was found dead, burned in his bed, though his beast remained chained. Rumor whispered of poison, or sorcery, or both. Such was Valyria, glorious, powerful, but ever at war with itself. Not all were blind. A few lords spoke in hushed voices of strange tremors beneath the mountains, of smoke blacker than before. Slaves whispered of screams in the earth. Priests muttered of omens in the flames. But pride deafened the 40. "The earth belongs to us," said Rogar Celtigar. "Its fire is ours to command." Only Daenys dreamed still of ruin, and only Aegon listened. Though the council dismissed fears, the land itself seemed restless. The 14 flames rumbled louder each season. Shepherds near the slopes reported fissures opening in pastures, spilling smoke that reeked of brimstone. Fishermen along the southern coast claimed new islets rose from the sea overnight, only to vanish again in foam and fire. Among the Celtigars, priests proclaimed these signs proof of divine favor. The earth trembles because it fears us. The mountains roar in worship. Rogar Celtigar commanded 100 slaves thrown into molten rock as offering, their screams echoing like music. The Valyrians mocked such piety. Corlys Velaryon boasted that if mountains fell, the sea would still cradle his house. Yet even he frowned when storms wrecked 3 fleets in a single year. The Targaryens withdrew further still. Alerna ceased to attend half the councils, pleading illness. Daenerys grew pale and sleepless, her dreams filled with towers falling, rivers boiling, skies torn by fire. The strength of the freehold lay not only in dragons, but in bloodlines, meticulously woven. For centuries, the Dragon Lords practiced a careful art of marriage. House Velaryon intermarried often with lesser coastal houses, seeking to secure fleets and harbors. Though mocked by purists for diluting their line, they defended their choices by pointing to wealth and trade power. Ships buy dragons food, Corlys was fond of saying. House Celtigar married almost exclusively within their own blood. Brothers took sisters, uncles took nieces. This insularity bred children with pale hair and eyes so light they seemed almost blind. Some were born weak or frail, but those who survived often displayed uncanny talents in sorcery. House Targaryen practiced a middle path. They kept to kin, but not so strictly. Aenar had wed a cousin of half-blood, producing Daenerys and her brother Gaemon. Rumors said Aenar chose her precisely because her blood carried prophetic gifts, though he never confirmed it. Thus the families defined themselves: Velaryons, pragmatic; Celtigars, zealous; Targaryens, cautious, and each judged the other wanting. The Council of 40 had long been fractious, but in the years before the Doom, its rivalry sharpened. Lord Corlys Velaryon pressed for conquest across the narrow sea. He spoke of Westeros, a land divided among petty kings. 12 crowns, none worth the metal they are forged from. Give me ships and fire, and I will give you a continent. Rhaegar Celtigar opposed him bitterly. Why should we waste dragons on barren rocks and stubborn savages? Let us turn east, where rich empires still stand. He pointed toward Yi Ti, Leng, and far Ashai. There lies true glory, not in muddy western isles. Others took sides, not from belief, but advantage. Promises of marriage, dragon eggs, and gold passed like coin across the chamber. Amid the noise, Aenar Targaryen sat silent. When pressed, he only murmured, "The West may yet prove safer than the East." His words went largely unheard. By her 15th year, Daenerys had become a figure of fascination and unease. Slender and silver-haired, she moved through halls like a shadow. Slaves whispered that her eyes burned with inner fire. Lords muttered that she carried madness, for she often woke screaming from dreams none could comprehend. Yet there were moments when she spoke with piercing clarity. At a feast in the Velaryon Hall, she turned suddenly to Corlys himself. "Your fleets will drown," she said calmly, "and your laughter will choke in smoke." The hall fell silent. Corlys roared with anger. But that year a storm destroyed half his ships. From then on, he refused to meet her gaze. Her brother Gaemon adored her fiercely, swearing to defend her against mockery. Yet even he confessed unease when she muttered of mountains exploding, of dragons shrieking as if in pain. Within the council, the great families began to fracture. Some whispered that perhaps Morgul Valkaris had been right, that one ruler should bind them all. But who? Corlys declared himself fit, for the seas bent to him. Rhaegar claimed divine sanction, pointing to his house's sorcery. Others put forward candidates, but none could command the rest. The 40 preferred anarchy gilded in fire to submission under one crown. Yet their refusal planted seeds of weakness. When the Gescari had ruled, they had spoken with one voice. Valyria spoke with 40. In the final decades before the Doom, Valyria shone brightest. Wealth from Essos poured into its markets. Towers grew higher, dragons multiplied, and festivals blazed with fire. The Festival of the 14 Flames filled the city each year with crimson banners, dancers painted in ash, and great flights of dragons wheeling overhead. Slaves were marched into the volcanoes as offerings, their deaths cheered as proof of divine favor. During one such festival, Daenerys stood apart on a balcony, while others sang. She wept. Later she told her father, they do not hear the mountains screaming. Yenna ordered his ships readied soon after. Only fragments survived. A handful of Dragonlord families who happened to be away, on campaign, on voyage, returned to find only ash. Most perished soon after, for without the forges and flames of Valyria, their power waned. Only one house endured with dragons intact, the Targaryens of Dragonstone. Daenerys the Dreamer wept when news came. Her visions had spared her kin, yet at the price of her people. The blood of the dragon is not ended, she said softly, but it is wounded. Her words proved true. For centuries to come, the memory of Valyria burned only in whispers until the day her descendants crossed again into Conquest. The sea winds howled around the jagged cliffs of Dragonstone, where black stone walls, twisted like molten roots, rose defiantly against the grey sky. For centuries the Targaryens had ruled here, lords of smoke and salt, distant from the quarrels of Westeros. But in Aegon, son of Aegon, the blood of old Valyria burned more fiercely than in any of his forebears. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his silver-gold hair flowing like a banner in the storm winds. His eyes, violet, cold and unblinking, seemed to measure the world as though it were already his. By his side were his sisters, who were also his wives, Visenya, stern and unforgiving, her hand never far from the hilt of Dark Sister, the Valyrian steel blade that had tasted the blood of more than one foe, and Rhaenys, younger, curious, and filled with restless fire, whose laughter could soften even Aegon's silence. Yet when she took the skies astride her dragon Meraxes, her gentle manner gave way to the merciless will of a conqueror. Behind them loomed the shadows of three beasts, the last great dragons of the world. Balerion, the Black Dread, whose wings blotted out the sun. Vagar, the fierce and relentless, hardened by Visenya's unyielding spirit. And Meraxes, mighty and swift, with eyes like molten gold. It was these creatures, born of fire and storm, that made House Targaryen more than mortal. Why Aegon turned his gaze westward is debated even by maesters centuries later. Some claim he was stirred by ambition alone, that he hungered for crowns and dominion. Others whisper of a dream, a vision of doom that would consume the world of men, against which only a united realm might stand. Whatever the truth, Aegon summoned his banners not for defense, but for conquest. He ordered ships prepared, swords forged, and spears fitted with dragonbone tips. Lords sworn to Dragonstone, though few in number, bent their knees and pledged themselves to a venture none had dared before. For while the Seven Kingdoms warred endlessly among themselves, never had any ruler dared to bind them all under one crown. A great painted table was fashioned in the halls of Dragonstone, a map of Westeros, carved upon oak and lacquered in vivid hues. Upon it, Aegon studied the rivers and mountains, the castles and holds, and placed markers of carved stone to mark his foes. To the west lay the Storm King, Argilac the Arrogant, who boasted of his unmatched strength. To the south stretched the Reach, with its fertile lands and countless swords. Beyond, the might of Old Town and the faith of the Seven glimmered like a beacon of ancient piety. Northward brooded the kings of Harrenhal and Winterfell, while in the Vale, proud Arryn lords soared high among the clouds. Each kingdom was strong, yet divided. Aegon meant to forge them into one realm, with fire as his hammer and blood as his anvil. In the year of the Conquest, Aegon and his sisters sailed west with fewer than 2,000 men, their ships skimming across the narrow sea like shadows before dawn. They did not strike first at the richest or the mightiest kingdom, but at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, where 3 hills rose beside the bay. It was here on a stony beach that the Targaryens made their first landing. They built a wooden palisade and named it the Aegon Fort. Around it the land was sparse and unclaimed, a place no king had thought worth guarding. Yet from that humble fort would grow King's Landing, the greatest city of the realm. On the highest hill, Aegon raised his banners, a field of black, with a red 3-headed dragon unfurled against the sky. Messengers were sent forth, bearing a simple command to the lords of Westeros: bend the knee or be destroyed. The first to answer was Argilac, last Storm King of House Durandon. Proud and fierce, Argilac had grown old, but had not yielded his vanity. He had offered his daughter's hand in marriage to Aegon, but the conqueror refused. In scorn, Aegon sent Orys Baratheon, his loyal companion and rumored bastard half-brother, to make counter-offer. Enraged, Argilac cut the hands off Aegon's envoys and sent them back in a box. So began the first battle of the Conquest. Argilac marched with his bannermen, their banners of the storm-crowned stag snapping in the wind, and met Orys upon the fields of the Wendwater. The clash was fierce, steel upon steel, as thunder rolled across the sky. Yet dragons wheeled above, and the Stormlanders soon learned that no valor of men could match the fire of the beasts. Miraxes and Vhagar descended, their flames scattering hosts like leaves in a gale. Argilac fought to the last, sword red with blood, until Orys himself cut him down. In the aftermath, Aegon showed both clemency and cunning. He gave Argilac's daughter to Orys to wed, and with her, the lands and titles of Storm's End. Thus was House Baratheon born, sworn in blood to House Targaryen. Yet while the Stormlands bent, the Riverlands groaned under the yoke of Harren the Black, who had raised the mightiest castle in all the world, Harrenhal, a fortress of stone towers so vast they seemed to scrape the heavens. Harren's pride was boundless, his cruelty legendary. He believed no army could breach his walls, no dragon could shake his towers. But Aegon had Valyria. As the Riverlords rose in rebellion, pledging themselves to the Dragon Lord, Aegon marched upon Harrenhal. From the skies descended the Black Dread, winds vast as sails, fire hotter than the forge of the gods. Stone melted like wax, towers cracked and crumbled, and Harren's sons screamed as flame devoured them. Harren himself perished within his burning hall, the screams of his people echoing across the god's eye. When dawn came, Harrenhal was a blackened ruin. Its towers melted, its glory turned to ash. The Riverlords bent the knee, and the tale of Harren's folly spread across the 7 kingdoms. No wall, no stone, no fortress could withstand the wrath of dragons. In every hall and holdfast, lords whispered in dread. The Starks of Winterfell considered their ancient oaths. The Arryns of the Vale weighed their high Aeries against dragonfire. In the Reach and the Westerlands, great hosts began to gather, for there remained those who would not yield. But Aegon pressed onward, his purpose unshaken. With his sisters, his dragons, and his loyal lords, he marched to the next trial, the greatest battle yet to come. The smouldering ruins of Harrenhal stood as a monument to hubris. Its melted towers, once thought eternal, jutted against the sky like the bones of a dead giant. Word of Harren the Black's fall spread on every road, carried by fleeing peasants, broken knights, and trembling lords. Across Westeros, men who had laughed at the notion of 3 dragons now spoke in whispers of fire that could melt stone, of shadows that passed over armies like the wings of gods. Yet even in fear, there was defiance. Two powers remained unbowed, the Reach and the Westerlands, each proud, each mighty in arms. Mern Knight's Gardener, king of the Reach, called forth his bannermen, and with them came the Golden Lions of Casterly Rock, led by King Loren Lannister. Together, their banners darkened the horizon. 55,000 men, knights in steel, spearmen, and archers, the greatest host Westeros had ever seen. They marched with confidence, believing sheer numbers could triumph where stone walls had failed. Aegon did not flinch. With him were barely 10,000 swords, Riverlords newly sworn, Stormlanders bound by Aerys Baratheon and his own household guard. Yet above them wheeled three shadows no host could match: Baelerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes. Still, even dragons could not fight battles alone. Aegon knew this truth. He ordered his men to dig trenches, sharpen stakes, and prepare the ground for fire. His sisters flew overhead, scouting the enemy's march, bringing back tidings of their strength. Visenya urged caution, her voice hard as steel. 50,000 men are not so easily broken, she warned. Rhaenys, eyes alight with restless fire, smiled and said, "Then let us see how 50,000 burn." It was on the wide plains of the Reach, near the Gold Road, that the two hosts met. The day was hot, the air heavy with dust. Lines of armored knights gleamed in the sun, banners of green and gold snapping beside the crimson lions of Lannister. Trumpets blared, and the earth shook with the thunder of hooves. Aegon advanced with his dragons. The Valyrian's wings spread vast as storm clouds, his roar drowning the clamor of men. On either side came Vhagar and Meraxes, their shadows racing across the fields. At first, the enemy lines held firm. Arrows flew skyward, spears bristled in dense formations, and war horns blared in defiance. Then came the fire. Balerion descended in a storm of flame. His breath washed over 1,000 men, turning shields to molten slag and flesh to ash. Screams filled the air as ranks dissolved in panic. From the other flank, Meraxes swooped, her jaws unleashing torrents of white-hot death, scattering cavalry like frightened deer. Above, Vhagar cut through the sky, raining fire upon archers who dared lift their bows. The plain became an inferno. Grass ignited, horses reared and screamed as fire devoured them, and armored men roasted alive within their steel shells. The cries of the dying rose higher than trumpets, higher than war horns, until the very earth seemed to weep with them. King Mern Gardener perished that day, along with his sons, his brothers, and his kin, his line wiped from the world in a single afternoon. Loren Lannister alone survived, fleeing the carnage with what men he could. But when he came before Aegon, he bent the knee, swearing fealty. Thus ended the House Gardener of Highgarden, and in their place, Aegon raised House Tyrell, loyal stewards who had opened the gates of the Reach without resistance. The field of fire burned for days, smoke rising in black pillars that could be seen leagues away. It was the only time in history that all three Targaryen dragons fought as one, and the memory of that terror endured for centuries. Yet one kingdom still stood proud, the North. Tyrion Stark, king in the North, gathered his banners and led 30,000 men southward. Hard men of the Winter Lands marched beside him, their direwolf banners snapping in the wind. At the Trident he camped, preparing to cross and challenge Aegon. But scouts returned with tales of Harrenhal aflame, of the Field of Fire, of 50,000 reduced to ash. They spoke of blackened corpses, of knights melted inside their armor, of the roar of dragons blotting out all courage. Torrhen listened in grim silence. That night, he went alone into his tent with his counselors. No man knows all that was said, but at dawn, the king in the north rose from his knees and laid his crown at Aegon's feet. He chose the lives of his people over pride, and from that day he was remembered not as a king, but as the king who knelt. The north remained unburnt, its castles unscathed, its people spared, for Torrhen Stark had bent the knee. In the Vale, the Eyrie perched high upon its mountain spires, deemed impregnable by every lord who had ever gazed upon it. Shara Arryn ruled as regent for her young son, Ronald, a boy of 6, with bright eyes and endless curiosity. She had arrayed her knights and sworn swords to resist Aegon. Yet when Visenya ascended the giant's lance on Vhagar, landing upon the very courtyard of the Eyrie, no host could withstand her. The boy Ronald ran to the dragon with wonder, begging to fly. Visenya lifted him to her saddle, and together they soared above the clouds. When they returned, the child laughed with delight and begged his mother to make peace. Shara bent the knee, placing her crown in Aegon's hands for the sake of her son's joy and her people's survival. Southward, in Oldtown, the High Septon of the Faith of the Seven watched these events with unease. The Citadel's Maesters urged caution. The city's lords feared fire and ruin. But when Aegon approached, the High Septon declared that the Seven themselves had blessed his rule. With ceremony and splendor, he anointed Aegon with holy oil, placing a crown upon his brow and proclaiming him the rightful king of Westeros. Thus, by fire, blood, and blessing, the conqueror's crown was forged. To mark his rule, Aegon commanded a throne be built, not of gold or jewels, but of the swords of his enemies. From every fallen foe he took their blades, more than 1,000 in number. Blacksmiths labored for months, fusing steel with dragonfire, until a monstrous seat emerged, jagged, cruel, its edges sharp as razors. To sit upon it was to feel the weight of power and its peril. Thus rose the Iron Throne, and from that throne Aegon Targaryen, first of his name, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, began his dynasty. His sisters ruled beside him, not as consorts alone, but as queens in truth. Visenya's stern hand brought fear, Rhaenys' gentle touch brought loyalty, and Aegon's silence commanded all. 7 kingdoms had become one. Fire and blood had written a new order upon the land, and though peace followed, it was a peace won by terror and held by the shadow of wings. The reign of Aerys II Targaryen began like the dawn of promise and ended in fire, blood, and madness. When he first took the Iron Throne, many in Westeros believed the young king would revive the splendor of his forebears. He was handsome, tall, with the silver hair and violet eyes that marked his lineage. He spoke of greatness, of surpassing Aegon the Conqueror himself, and in his first years there was reason to hope. Aerys surrounded himself with capable men, none more important than Tywin Lannister, whom he named Hand of the King. Tywin brought discipline, order, and prosperity. Under his governance, taxes were fair, justice swift, and the coffers of the crown filled to bursting. Roads were repaired, trade flourished, and King's Landing grew into a true capital of the realm. Many whispered that Tywin ruled more truly than the king, but Aerys, basking in the glory that Tywin's labor won him, did not at first seem to mind. Yet a shadow lay over the king's marriage. He wed his sister Rhaella, following the Targaryen custom, but theirs was no union of joy. Their children died one after another, stillborn or in infancy. Only one survived, Prince Rhaegar, born on Dragonstone during a fierce storm. To many, his birth was an omen. The prince grew into a solemn, beautiful youth who loved music, prophecy, and song, yet also trained as a knight and proved a warrior of talent. To the lords of Westeros, Rhaegar appeared the very image of hope, a son who might restore the fading glory of House Targaryen. But Aerys grew restless. He could not bear that Tywin outshone him. When Tywin's wife, Joanna, gave birth to twins, Jaime and Cersei, Aerys cruelly remarked that Tywin had fathered heirs to rule, while he himself had only misfortune. The remark cut deep, and though Tywin remained dutiful, bitterness festered. Later, when Aerys named young Jaime to the Kingsguard, stripping Tywin of his heir, it was less a gesture of honor than a spiteful strike against his most faithful servant. The turning point came with the defiance of Duskendale, when Lord Denys Darklyn withheld taxes and sought a royal charter for his town. Aerys rashly went to subdue him. Instead, he was captured and held for half a year, while Tywin hesitated to storm the castle for fear of the king's life. In the end, Sir Barristan Selmy infiltrated Duskendale alone and brought Aerys out alive. But the king who returned was not the same as the king who had been taken. Imprisonment had broken something within him. He emerged convinced that every man plotted his death. He refused to leave the Red Keep, let his hair and nails grow long, and began to see treason in every whisper. From then on, fire became his obsession. He ordered men burned for disobedience, lords for imagined treachery, servants for trivial mistakes. His pyromancers, once a guild in decline, found in him a patron. They brewed vast stores of wildfire at his command, storing it beneath the city in hidden caches. Aerys declared that fire was purity, that it would cleanse and protect his reign. Fear spread through his court. The Mad King, men began to call him in whispers. Amid this darkness, Rhaegar shone ever brighter. He was beloved of the small folk and respected by the lords. He married Elia Martell of Dorne, securing a powerful alliance. Though Elia was delicate and bore her children with difficulty, she gave him a daughter, Rhaenys, and a son, Aegon. Rhaegar doted on them, yet his mind often seemed elsewhere. He studied prophecy, seeking the meaning of a song of ice and fire. He grew convinced that his line held the key to the fate of the world. It was at the great tourney at Harrenhal that the course of history veered toward disaster. The tourney, ostensibly held by Lord Went, became the grandest gathering in memory. Knights and lords came from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. Behind the jousts and feasts, some whispered that it was a council in secret, that discontented lords meant to weigh the possibility of replacing the Mad King with his noble son. Whether truth or rumor, it mattered little, for what followed eclipsed all else. Rhaegar rode in the lists, shattering lance after lance, until no man could stand against him. When he won, he was to crown the Queen of Love and Beauty, as tradition held. All expected him to place the crown in the lap of his wife, Elia. Instead, he rode past her, past every lady, and laid the wreath of blue roses in the lap of Lyanna Stark of Winterfell. Gasps echoed. It was a gesture that could not be mistaken. Lyanna was betrothed to Robert Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End. For Rhaegar to crown her was an open declaration, a scandal that tongues wagged over for months. Some said Lyanna had caught his heart. Others whispered of prophecy, that she was part of some destiny he foresaw. Whatever the truth, the gesture set sparks to kindling. Soon after, Lyanna vanished. Some said Rhaegar abducted her, taking her to a hidden place. Others claimed she went with him willingly, to her brother Eddard and her betrothed Robert. It was a kidnapping, a crime that demanded blood. Brandon Stark, her fiery elder brother, rode to King's Landing with companions to demand her return. These seized them, strangling Brandon with a cord, while his father Rickard was burned alive in his armor. The court watched in horror as wildfire roasted the Lord of Winterfell, while his son strangled himself trying to save him. Aeses laughed as they died. That cruelty sealed the fate of his dynasty. Jon Arryn of the Vale, foster father to both Eddard and Robert, refused to surrender them when Aerys demanded their heads. Instead, he raised his banners in open rebellion. Robert Baratheon called his Stormlords. Ned Stark marched the north, and the Riverlands joined under House Tully. whose daughters wed into the rebel houses. Thus was born Robert's Rebellion, a war to end a dynasty. The war burned across Westeros. At Goldtown, the Arryns fought for control of the Vale. Robert won his first victory at Summerhall, though he was grievously wounded. He fought at Ashford, smashing loyalist hosts, his great warhammer cleaving men and steel alike. Charismatic, larger than life, he became the heart of the rebellion. Lords who despised the Mad King flocked to his banners. Not all was triumph. In the Reach, loyalists won victories. At one point, Robert was driven to flight, hunted from his lands, yet always he returned, hammer in hand, defiant. At Stony Sept, he was nearly taken, but the small folk hid him, and he broke his pursuers in battle. Step by bloody step, the rebels advanced. At last, Rhaegar himself took the field. He donned black armor adorned with rubies, and led the royal host to meet Robert at the crossing of the Trident. There, beneath banners whipping in the wind, the fate of kingdoms was decided. The two champions clashed in the river itself, their blows resounding like thunder. Robert's hammer struck true, smashing through Rhaegar's chest. The prince fell, and rubies scattered across the water like spilled blood. To this day, men call it the Ruby Ford. With Rhaegar's death, loyalist strength shattered. In King's Landing, Aerys raved. He commanded the pyromancers to ignite the caches of wildfire hidden beneath the city, determined to burn his own capital rather than surrender it. But treachery came from where he least expected. Jaime Lannister, youngest of his Kingsguard, watched his king descend into madness and chose his Oathbreaker's path. He slew Aerys before the Iron Throne, cutting him down as he cried for fire. Thus died the last king of the dragons in his own hall. Yet the sack of King's Landing was a horror that stained the realm. Tywin Lannister, who had long bided his time, marched his armies to the city gates, proclaiming loyalty to the rebels. When the gates were opened, his men butchered indiscriminately. Princess Aelia of Dorne was raped and murdered, her children dashed against walls. Their deaths were offered as tokens of loyalty to Robert, though they were crimes that would echo in memory and vengeance. Robert, though victorious, was not untouched by grief. Lyanna Stark had been found in a bed of blood, her life slipping away. What words she spoke to her brother Eddard in her final moments were never revealed, but Ned left her with sorrow in his heart. To Robert, she was the love of his life. Lost forever, he would never truly recover. Still, the realm crowned him. Robert Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, became king of the Seven Kingdoms, the first of his name. His claim rested not on blood, but on conquest and on the descent of his grandmother from the Targaryens. To secure his throne, he wed Cersei Lannister, binding himself to Tywin's house. It was a match of politics, not love, and in time it soured. Robert found no joy in his queen, who in turn gave him only contempt. His heart remained in the tomb of Lyanna Stark, buried in Winterfell. The last Targaryens, a boy and a baby girl, fled across the narrow sea. Viserys and Daenerys, children of a fallen dynasty, carried only their name and the weight of exile. Few gave them thought at the time. The realm turned to its new king, hoping for peace after years of fire and war. Robert proved a poor king for peace. He was a man made for war, for feasts, for drinking and wenching. He ruled less than he indulged, leaving governance to others. Yet his charm, his booming laugh, and his great victories held the realm together, at least for a time. The Baratheon stag now crowned the Red Keep, the Targaryen dragons, reduced to skulls gathering dust. Years later, seeking to bind his reign more firmly, Robert rode north with his court to visit his old friend. At Winterfell, beneath the direwolf banners, he greeted Eddard Stark, asking him to serve as Hand of the King. It was a reunion of comrades forged in rebellion, but beneath it lay shadows, whispers of secrets, grudges, and ambitions that would soon shape the fate of Westeros again. Thus ended the Age of Dragons, and began the reign of the Stag, crowned in blood, bound by uneasy alliances, haunted by love, lost and vengeance unavenged. The Iron Throne, sharp and cold, had claimed another king, and its tale was far from over. Under the cold, dark sky that hung over King's Landing in those last terrible years of Aerys II, the realm learned anew what a crown could weigh. It had been a long downward slope, a falling off from promise into suspicion, from ceremony into cruelty. Yet even then, the final plunge arrived with a suddenness that shocked those who survived. This is the chronicle of that fall, and of the fragile order that rose from the ashes, of Aerys' slow unraveling into what men would come to call madness, of the violence that ended his reign, of Robert Baratheon's triumph and the heavy peace he kept but could not mend, and of the two men who held the new kingdom at bay, Jon Arryn, the steady hand who governed in lieu of a king, and Eddard Stark, the stoic wolf whose honor would carry both his greatest virtue and his deepest sorrow. When Aerys the Fashioned first climbed the steps of the Red Keep, he was not yet a madman, but a prince lauded by courtiers and hopeful houses. He had the look and the pale fire of his line, silver hair, lavender eyes, a mien at once lofty and fragile, and for a time his court glowed with possibility. Maesters of the Citadel would later write of those early years as a kind of customary soft light before nightfall. Laws were considered, debts rebalanced, trade resown. Tywin Lannister, called to the hand's seat, brought order and the stern efficiencies of Casterly Rock. Under a governance that could both inspire and bridle the restless lords, King's Landing prospered. The city's markets swelled, hovels and houses were repaired, and in halls across the Seven Kingdoms, men nodded with satisfaction at the seeming renewal of the dynasty that had once bound these islands together. The practical stability of Tywin's handship, iron, cold, efficient, masked, a deeper danger for Aerys. Some men of power, including the Hand himself, would appear to be more king by rock and letter than Aerys by blood and presence, where authority relied on deeds rather than merely the ceremonial crown. The young king felt, in ways he could not always articulate, diminished. Such feelings, left to fester, are the salt that rots wood. What first set the lines of infection was not statecraft, but a humiliation of a different sort. Aerys' capture at Duskendale, the months that he spent under the hand of a lord who sought a royal charter, marked the crucial break between the king, who had confidently ruled, and the man who thereafter took counsel from shadows. When Ser Barristan Selmy's lone and dangerous daring freed him, Aerys returned with the look of a man who had been touched behind the eye by nightmare. A softness seemed to crack into a hard shell. He began to mistrust, and mistrust multiplied into obsession. Paranoia is a quick and greedy thing. It eats its host and calls that hunger providence. Aerys swore himself to the pyromancers, men whose arts had once been occult curiosities and had lately been taught in secret vaults beneath the Red Keep. With their favor, he learned how to brew and hide wildfire, the green, terrible substance that burned with a heat unlike any other. He ordered the pyromancers to hide caches of it beneath King's Landing, prefacing their stashes with taboos and muttered promises. "Keep it safe," he said, "as a man might keep a treasure or a poison. But where kings keep poison, they see in every friend a rival, and in every rival a nail to hammer into their wall." Aerys' cruelty became a theater. He watched men burn. He delighted in the spectacle in ways that repelled even those who had formerly served him. Executions that once answered some sense of justice now answered a private thirst. The cries from the pyres, the flaring of the green light that the pyromancers fed, the scent of char and flesh in the city's air. These became the stamps of his rulership. Laughter and feasts were replaced by guard changes and midnight whisperings. Men started to fear their shadows and their own reflections. The Mad King's descent was not merely a matter of strange private rituals. It rewired the political life of Westeros, where counsel once shaped a kingdom's fate. Now suspicion shut the king away in Maegor's holdfast. He let his beard grow and the nails of his hands lengthen. He said he could feel the crowd shifting like tides against his skin. He took cruelties as tests of loyalty. A lord might be forced to watch his own sons burnt where they stood, and then be offered his titles again if he would only swear anew. Those who served Eris with the most visible zeal, pyromancers above all, grew fat on preferment, and in their vaults, the city was seeded with a sleeping fire that no lawyer nor lord could truly account for. It is a strange thing that histories should mix love and prophecy into the one single story that sparks a war. Yet the tale of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark and the crowding of meaning that came to surround them must be told where these events converge, for it is impossible to unweave them cleanly. Prince Rhaegar was in many ways the direct antithesis of his father, stern and luminous. He loved music, poetry, and the old songs. He pursued study and magic, and wore sorrow as armor. The realm watched him with divided enthusiasm. Some thought him the salvation of House Targaryen. Others whispered that his Hume train of thinking made him odd to the point of danger. He married Elia Martell of Dorne, forging an alliance that, on paper, promised to ease old tensions. Yet the marriage did not quell the prince's inward hunger for meaning, nor did it restrain the fateful acts that followed. The great tourney at Harrenhal, meant as a spectacle and a political courtship, was a gathering of lords and ambitions. It was there that Rhaegar, who had proved himself in both arms and song, did what no one expected. He took the crown of the tourney's prize, traditionally placed upon a maiden's lap, and set it not upon Alea's hair, but upon the lap of Lyanna Stark. That act glittered with possible meanings. Was it a simple cavalier gesture, or a prophetic movement? Rhaegar's own belief in the songs of old, and in a shaping fate, complicated the act. Contemporaries would debate for generations whether he believed Lyanna was a harbinger, the winged woman of some old and half-forgotten rhyme. In the crucible of rumor, the gesture echoed like a bell. From that coronation, a heat gathered. Lyanna disappeared. What exactly happened? Kidnapping, abduction, or elopement remains a matter shrouded in grief and argument. Robert Baratheon, who loved Lyanna as a man loves the thing he will not lose, took her loss like a blade in the chest. Brandon Stark, her brother, rode for King's Landing and would never return. The king's response, Eris's monstrous choice to kill both Rickard and Brandon in his throne room, etched the line of revolt in stone. When Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing, as the old songs say, he did so with righteous fury. He demanded the king yield Lyanna, or at least return with honor. But Eris's mind, already steeped in paranoia, saw in Brandon's violence the face of a conspirator against the crown. Rickard Stark, called to answer, came as a lord should. There he was executed, burned, while Brandon was strangled in front of his father. The spectacle was meant as admonition. It became the last civic crucible for loyalty. Jon Arryn of the Vale, foster father to both Robert and Eddard, refused to deliver the youths to the king. Instead, he sheltered them and sent an open summons to war. In the space of a few months, the matter became a war that would remake the Seven Kingdoms. The rebellion that coalesced around Robert Baratheon, Eddard Stark, and Jon Arryn was a diverse coalition. Some were driven by honor, some by grief, some by political hunger. Though Rhaegar had been a prince of many talents and had enemies of his own within court, it was his death at the Trident that truly undone Targaryen hope. The clash at the Trident was thunderous and terrible. Robert, a man of prodigious strength and appetite for battle, dealt the death blow to Rhaegar, amidst the screech of lances and the weight of cavalry. Rhaegar's fall scattered the royal cause, while the field of the Trident broke the heart of the royal army in the open. The end of Aerys's reign within King's Landing was a different sort of cataclysm. When news of the collapse reached the city, Aerys's plan, terrible beyond measure, was to set his own capital aflame rather than allow a rebel king to sit the Iron Throne. He commanded the pyromancers to ready the caches beneath the city to be lit by his last orders. The intention was not merely to die, but to burn the world he believed had turned. In such calculations, madness binds history to destroy all so that none might inherit what you despise. And yet the Mad King met his end not at the hands of rebel swords, but by the sword of a man sworn to defend him. Jaime Lannister, youngest among the Kingsguard, and a figure as brilliant and as damning as a new sun, made the fateful choice. He killed Aerys in the Red Keep's chamber of terror and burning. In this parricide, there is not simple heroism. Jaime's hand saved the city from becoming an oven. It also branded him as regicide. He earned a slur that would cling to him through the future, Kingslayer. Even those who owed their lives to him could scarcely reconcile their gratitude with the biblical weight of his act. What followed was not the restoration of justice, so much as carnage with the face of order. Tywin Lannister, who had marched to King's Landing with the pretense of aid, entered the city with his own men and oversaw a sack that would stain many consciences. Elia Martell and her children were murdered, an atrocity whose cruelty echoes down through the centuries, and one that planted in the Martells an anger that would never be wholly quenched. The Lannister-handed sacking was both an act of vengeance and a political calculus, an offering of blood and bodies that made Robert's path to the throne easier, albeit at a price few dared to quantify. Robert Baratheon returned to court a victorious general and a bitter man. His victories had been costly, friends were dead, houses burned, and the love of his life was lost. Where the realms saw jubilation, Robert sat upon the Iron Throne with a quiet that might be called resignation. He had the capital, the crown, the oaths, but he did not have his heart. He carried it with him, as one carries a wound in armor, hidden and always painful. His coronation was a parade of triumph, yet it disguised the fragile truth. The man who ruled was made for battle, not counsel. He had the appetite for hunt and wine and camaraderie. He had not the patient temper for keeping books, for balancing long-suffering lords, for the daily threadwork of governance. In him beat the pulse of a conqueror, whose joy in victory could not translate into the slow labor of ruling a realm. If Robert was not a governor, he did possess an instinct for political marriage. To secure his rule, he married Cersei Lannister. The union was warm in calculation and cold in heart. Cersei's beauty and Lannister grasp, represented by the towering intelligence and ambition of Tywin, offered him a shield of power and a coffer's cushion. Yet this was not a joining of lovers. It was a knot tied tight with expediency and tension. It was Jon Arryn who preserved the skeleton of governance in the war's aftermath. Arryn's claim to influence did not rest upon martial flair, but upon steadiness and an acquired reputation of equanimity. He had schooled and fostered Robert and Eddard, and in the years before the rising flame, his counsel had been regarded as the salt of the Vale, necessary, enduring, plain. When the rebellion succeeded, Robert appointed Jon Arryn as Hand, not merely out of gratitude, but because only Arryn had the patience and the broadness of vision to hold the fractious Seven Kingdoms together. Jon's stewardship was a season of mending. He balanced credit and contact, smoothed the high-strung egos of lords who had expected a far harsher recompense, and remolded the sprawling web of fealty into something that could bear the weight of a crowned Baratheon. He was not indifferent to titles or to credit. He simply recognized that a realm must be lived with, lived in by law and rito, bribery and bond, diplomacy, and threat. He carved a council that could function where a king could not, and in those years, he was a slow-acting salve for many wounds. He brokered marriages, adjusted stewardships, reordered financial obligations, and maintained the uneasy alliance between houses that had only just lain down their spears. Historically, his role is often underemphasized by minstrels who favor the clang of swords, yet without Jon Arryn the Baratheon, hold on the throne would have been much less certain. He was the hinge upon which the first decade of the new rule turned. Eddard Stark's return to Winterfell was not the end of his involvement in the politics of the realm. He was a man who embodied the older virtues of duty, of unadorned honesty, of an honor that bent according to a certain code rather than convenience. His presence at the center of Robert's life was both anchor and omen. The two had been friends of spirit and by oath, brothers in all but blood. But where Robert sought loud victory and the pleasures of a large life, Ned sought stability and the quiet weave of duty. Ned's bearing concealed more than the outer hard lines of a northern lord. He carried secrets, and with them a private burden. The child named Jon Snow, whom he raised in Winterfell as his bastard, was a truth locked in the chest of his loyalty. The exact nature of Jon's parentage, rumors and whispers aside, was a knot of choices and lies born out of protection and love. It was a decision that pooled honor with a kind of desperate tenderness to shield the infant from a world that would have torn him apart if the truth of his birth had been known. Eddard's return to the north did not signal a withdrawal from the tangled affairs of kings. He was Robert's hand in the straightforward sense at times, and his counsel was sought. He owed Robert blood and loyalty. He owed Winterfell the stewardship he had promised his house. To the end, he would move between those two commitments, sometimes with ease, often with pain. A key part of this new order was the uneasy and dangerous marriage between Crown and Lannister. Tywin Lannister's family had delivered the coup's crucial acts, whether their sack of the city and the murder of Elia and her children were acts of vengeance or cruelty, they nonetheless bought them the debt of the throne. Robert's marriage to Cersei was a sealing of blood and influence. It was a pact in which each party took a cut of power, even as they hid mutual distrust. The Lannisters were uneducated in the ways of naive chivalry. They understand profit and the weight of reputation. Tywin, who had waited upon fortune and strategy with a predator's patience, saw in Robert the chance to give his house a hand on the kingdom's scale. Cersei, beautiful and remorseless in her own way, settled into the court center, not as a meek consort, but as a presence that would in time demand a crown of influence. The Baratheon Lannister linkage was more than bride price. It was a political mortgage, with interest measured in favors and in names of sons. For a time, the realm breathed easier. The banners of Aegon's line lay strewn in fields and on pyres. The Targaryen dragons had been extinguished as living threats. Yet the peace that followed was brittle. There were debts unpaid and wrongs unresolved, embers that might flare given wind. Houses rearranged alliances not by virtue but by suspicion and their private longings, ambitions for power. Old blood feuds, grudges born of humiliation, were mere tinder. Robert himself, for all his gifts in battle and his coarse, generous humor, was a poor administrator. His court grew costly and imprudent, and the realm's coffers, fragile after years of war, required the patient stewardship that Jon Arryn provided, but that Robert, by temperament, neither enjoyed nor tolerated for long. The seeds of dissension, planted with violence and then left unwatered, do not always die. They sleep, biding an hour. It would be easy and lazy to write the fall of Aerys II as a triumph of reason over madness, the story of a green flame struck down by sober civilians. The truth is unclean and full of blood. Yaime's blade that felled the king was also that which birthed disrepute. Tywin's troops that ransacked King's Landing protected the new crown, yet partly justified their actions in revenge to a degree that no law could quite pardon. Robert's triumph was both righteous and monstrous. It freed a realm from dread that stained its honor. Mass graves were dug. The songs of victory were salted with tears. The psychological cost to those who bore the crown was long and deep. Robert tried to fill the empty place in his chest with riot, drinking, hunting, forging friendships over coins and banners. But grief has a way of gnawing beneath an armor of laughter. Jon Arryn governed in the quiet that grief makes. Eddard returned home and tried to build again, a life that required less of treachery and more of stoic truth. Yet even old men cannot avoid time's teeth, nor can they forestall the new storms that bud on the horizon. To read history only as cause and effect is to miss how human character curls the course of events. The Lannisters gained influence, but would in later years turn from helpful to ravenous. They had secured their quarter of power, but the pride that made them triumphant would make them dangerous. Robert, who could wield a hammer and laugh, was ill-equipped for accounts and for the long hunger of governance. That ill suit would hollow his realm of prudence. Jon Arryn's wisdom would be a rare, stabilizing thing, and its absence, once it ended, would be sharply felt. Ned Stark's honor was a bulwark for his house, and a harbinger of tragedy, for anomaly of virtue in the cruel soil of court politics can be a bright, lonely thing. The tale that followed, of splintered loyalties, small betrayals, of marriages made in calculation rather than in love, begins here in the uneasy aftermath. Where blood tasted victory, it stained. Where oaths were sworn, they were not always kept. The killing of a king and the crowning of another filled space. The world would continue to measure in danger. Years passed. In the golden haze of some years, Robert's rule was remembered in songs and bonfires. In darker years, in the cold and damp, the kingdom looked to what lay beneath: unresolved grief, dawning debts, secret alliances, seeds of anger. Those who had served and fought during the rebellion aged. Some grew bitter, some benign. The old question, how to balance justice and power, remained. Men who had made peace with the toppling of dragons had not made peace with the acts performed in that fall. In this interlude, Jon Arryn's counsel proved the stabilizing force. He is often called the quiet minister, the man whose steadiness held the new crown upright. He balanced the prince's appetites with the city's need and maintained, with a patient hand, the law that would govern the young. Eddard remained the northern moon, and Robert the storm. That triad, hammer, falcon, and wolf, kept the arch of peace from buckling for a time. History cares little for clean endings. A king may die in a single moment, and yet leave behind 1,000 small things that ensure his name is either curse or legend. Aerys's fall did not redeem all sins. His death made new sins possible. Robert's crown did not end the thirst for speed or for gold. Indeed, it multiplied the hunger in new hands. Yet there is dignity to be observed in the steadiness of Jon Arryn, in the weary honor of Eddard Stark, in Robert's human fragility that is more complex than the songs that praise him. They were the mortal keepers of the realm, in a moment when a godlike crown had become the most dangerous toy. Their efforts bought the realm a time to breathe, even if that breath must be measured and wary. So the story moves forward, from one darkness to the next, from one uneasy peace into another storm. The fall of a house of dragons and the rise of a house of stags were not merely political acts, they were human tragedies, acts replete with betrayal and bravery. In them lie the raw elements that would shape the fate of houses and men for 100 years hence. And if we judge these men, Aerys, Robert, Jon, Ned, let us also remember the truth that a crown is both a prize and a poison. It brings the glory of authority and the burden of ruin. It will lift men high and it will break them, sometimes all in a single lifetime.